Oh, good afternoon. I'm Eric Hunt, University of Nebraska Extension.
I'm Andrew Little. I'm a faculty member in the School of Natural Resources.
Cool. So my focus is more agricultural meteorology, ag climate, and I follow the weather very closely. And one of the things we've just seen a lot of in this part of the country in the last decade or so, particularly in recent years, is just extreme events, high winds, particularly though extreme precipitation events where we've had flooding. Then we have tremendous whiplash from too much precipitation to severe drought. Like we see that sometimes in the case of, or in the course of a couple of months. But there are ways of mitigating against these extremes. And in particular, conservation, regenerative-based agriculture really offers a lot of solutions for mitigating against extreme precipitation, really in the form of getting healthier soils and trying to manage runoff. So if you can store more water, you're keeping that water for later, and it's less water that you have to put on as an input cost. So there's tremendous savings there. And my understanding is you've worked quite a bit with habitat, so you kind of come at this from a different angle.
Sure, yeah. So especially working in intensive agricultural landscapes like Nebraska, we're always thinking about how do we ensure we can feed and fuel the world, but doing that in a sustainable way. And so my background's in wildlife management, and I'm thinking a lot about how can we target maybe marginal acres, as you were mentioning. You have areas where maybe that field, you get a heavy rain, and so then that area of the field is inundated with water, and potentially that producer, especially if it's early season, they may have to replant that section of the field. And so finding ways we can strategically target those marginal acres for something different, particularly to benefit soil erosion, water quality, and wildlife populations. In Nebraska as a whole, we've seen substantial declines of grassland birds, both non-game and game bird species, and it's really important we can take and improve the habitat so we can benefit those species across the state of Nebraska.
So what are some of the methods or technologies that we could use to start improving some of those marginal acres?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one way you can do it is using tools like yield monitor data. So yield monitor data, something's coming out of a combine, and you can see basically those green acres, which are productive acres, the red acres where you're essentially losing more money on those acres, and that's kind of those potentially marginal acres that you can target for alternative practices. The big challenge with that type of technology and kind of thinking about the long term of it is, well, how can we start visualizing some of these conservation practices in a way that's that can be really quick and efficient for landowners to see that. But yeah, yield monitor is probably one of the easiest ways that we can look at that land and then strategically target. We can also look at other factors like the hydrology of that area, looking at slope, aspect, things like that potentially would drive why those, and soil type, why those areas are maybe not as consistently good as other acres in that field.
Sure. Speaking of changes, I don't know how long you've been here. You've been here about 7 years?
Yeah, I've been here for 7 years, yeah.
Been here, well, I'm from here, but I remember when this used to just be kind of a wasteland out here.
Yeah.
And the last 5 years, there's been a committed effort into turning this into an actual prairie. So we have a good mix of cool season, warm season grasses. Now this is a visually appealing prairie, and it's also offering habitat for birds and different beneficial insects. And also last year was used for grazing purposes. We brought the cattle out here.
That's true, yeah.
It was a lot of fun. But would it be, so in working with farmers, I talk a lot about, I hear a lot of stories about, this runoff and this erosion. And, I sense a lot of them are very interested in doing things that are more regenerative, are more sustainable. But I sense that, there are limitations sometimes what they can do. There's also, I think, some educational gaps or just gaps in how do I even get started on this?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think maybe you have an idea that may really actually help quite a few of them just get going.
Yeah.
Just take those first couple steps toward regenerative conservation agriculture.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been envisioning is the development of a virtual reality tool, and where we can start visualizing what that would look like on their land. As I mentioned before, that's one of the biggest challenges that producers face, and really anybody as a human. You're looking out, and if, like you mentioned earlier, this area was just basically a yard previously.
Well, it was it was a really crappy yard.
Yeah. And so then now look at it, and there's opportunity where we have prairie here. One, it's a great teaching tool for students, but two, it just really looks pretty, and you get to see the pollinators and the birds that are utilizing this here. And so the idea is I can now visualize this, but like you mentioned, it took a few years to get this established. And I think that's what we see is one of the biggest barriers for adoption of conservation, is that it's hard to visualize what that's going to look like on my land, and it's a risk. And so ultimately that's a risk if I'm going to take I'm going to take acres out of production and put that into something else. And then the question we have to ask is, how can we start to visualize that? And that's the idea of the virtual reality system, where we can actually have a tool, a decision support tool, to help producers actually visualize what that would look like on their property. So if I want to put in some prairie, for example, and some marginal acres, could I begin to visualize that so I could see what the potential impacts of having that on my property would look like?
So this sounds really cool. So I was reading an article earlier in the week about Zuckerberg. Regardless of what your opinion of him, he's certainly willing to be out on the forefront of something. And he was talking about how, he thinks smartphones will be not relevant in 10 years because people are just going to be able to get information through their glasses, through other devices. And what I'm almost envisioning is like being able to put on like some sort of headset that, a farmer could take a look at land that maybe he or she's been farming for decades and look at it in a completely new way.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I think that's really cool. And I think there's this class on city campus, the senior design, that I think that they actually could maybe do something like this.
That would be awesome. Yeah. Because I think it's very much needed from the challenges that we face. And we do have to feed and fuel a growing world, but thinking about that long-term sustainability. And, I think there's an opportunity where basically we're able to, visualize something that, in this case, it takes a few years, and being able to take and quickly see, if I put, perennial vegetation like this prairie here in that marginal acre, what does that actually look like? Can I see that without having to wait 3 or 4 or 5 years to really see that? And that's where I think there's an opportunity with the senior design program, being able to help in figuring out a way that we can begin to visualize this and then turn that into a prototype tool, which then can be expanded down the road with other opportunities.
Sure. And I think even more importantly is beyond just the visualization, just what aesthetically it looks like.
Sure.
Might also give them options as to, how much resilience will you have in some of these really extreme events? Like, for example, if you have like a 5-inch rain in 3 hours,
sure,
what's that look like in 5 years versus now with these improvements? I talk to farmers that say some of the best influence they have in terms of getting their peers to adopt more of these practices is just visually seeing what happens on their property where they've actually been practicing these conservation regenerative methods for several years. They don't have the erosion, and I think that really is a good step toward the future.
Yeah.
And I think it's really good, beneficial, really cool that we can, use the talent of our students that I know we have a great computer science program here. We got a good business school, so we can combine their talents with something that I think is, really going to be in demand. It really is going to be absolutely essential for, like you said, feeding and fueling the world. Yeah.
And I would just say, to kind of wrap that up, is that I really think it's an opportunity to really show that Nebraska can lead in this area and addressing that resiliency, a long-term sustainability of our farms, and thinking about ways that we can innovatively push that needle towards adopting conservation strategically in our working landscapes with producers in mind, and helping them visualize some of these really creative ways to see conservation practices on their property.
Yeah. So my understanding is the senior design class will start here in late August, and then my hope is if we had a cool virtual reality prototype by April, my gosh, this could be an opportunity for us to go to not just government agencies, but certainly I think there would be investors out there that would be all over this.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that there could be investors, other commodity boards and things like that that are in groups like that that are interested in taking this from basically a prototype and scaling that up with opportunities to incorporate hydrologic modeling, thinking about other innovative like economic modeling, so you can kind of compare and contrast what types of practices may or may not benefit you strategically, and what is helping you ultimately optimize the overall profitability of your farm, but doing that in a way that's very, very sustainable for the future, and addressing some of these natural resource challenges that producers are facing with soil erosion, water quality, and declining wildlife populations.
Yeah, so my real hope is that we have some very interested students. I look forward to working with them.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a challenging project, I think, but I think this is going to be, I'm biased, but I think it's maybe the most worthwhile project that's going to be put up in front of the senior design class this year.
Yeah.
Again, I'm biased, though.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great opportunity, and I think this really, really can kind of set the stage for the future, and really kind of, really in my mind, be a game changer in how we visualize conservation and working landscapes.
Yep, well, Big Red's going to be good in football again here soon, and Big Red's going to show the way forward for conservation agriculture with this.
Absolutely, totally agree. Yep.
Well, it's fun chatting with you, Andy.
Absolutely, yeah, I enjoyed it.